Political analyst Ralph Mathekga is suggesting that maybe it's time to rethink the industry as a whole. He joins me now to discuss this further. Good evening, Dr. Mathekga. It's a pleasure to have you with us on News at Prime. Interestingly enough, you say that part of the public outcry over the situation with the industry, in fact, shows a lack of empathy and might be slightly unfair on taxi operators.
Good evening, Kathy, and good evening to your viewers at home. I think that this is the problem with the taxi industry. Actually, most people do not want to speak for this industry. Whenever we look at it, we shun it. It is the black market in a sense that it continues to exist as an informal sector. And I think that it actually shows that most of the times we face irritations. We never show that empathy. It's always about labeling this sector as a sector that is made up of people who are belligerent, violent, and so forth. But we forget that the root of the violence within this sector, it is because it is the sector that has existed for many years without a proper regulation by government. From far under apartheid, it was never properly regulated. Taxi industry, they were on their own and so forth, ferrying poor people from a poor neighborhood to a very affluent neighborhood. Actually, the taxi industry built South Africa's current industry that we see. But when we look at it, we do not see it in that manner. We see it as an irritation, as a sector that we wish it could just die a natural death. It could just disappear on the face of South Africa. And I think this is the way the problem starts.
Sure. Part of the historical context, I believe, hasn't necessarily been lost on many South Africans. Of course, the big question which you raise, which I think is the one that needs to be answered, is around how the industry can be reimagined. And that's a question that government needs to tackle from a policy perspective too. And it seems that they haven't been able to clearly do that in the last 20-odd years of democracy.
I mean, Kathy, in order to even think about that, how do we reimagine the taxi industry? We firstly have to shift from the mentality of policing the industry to regulating the industry. What we have been doing in the last 25 years is to police the industry. You know, they need to stop at the robots, they need to be respectful, they don't need to cause accidents and so forth. And that's just about it. And we had no sense of how can we make it into a modern industry? I mean, I want to give you an example. Any motor manufacturer know in South Africa that the taxi industry has actually made them very rich. But an industry that has survived for over 50 years, they've got no shares on the manufacturing of the fleet. They're the biggest consumers of those fleet. And for me, when I'm talking about reimagining it, I'm talking in line, along those lines, along rethinking about it as a transportation sector, where you are thinking about refinancing this sector in a way that there is they've got a shareholdership in the way in which it is being financed. They've got a shareholdership in the manufacturing of the fleet. The taxi bosses need to have shareholders across all the pipeline, and we need to transform it. Maybe we don't need this fleet anymore. We need better buses, and they can be able to operate them. But we seem to have given up, and we have got a wish that we will create a competitor along the buses, and that will just crowd them out in a manner that they are no longer going to be part of the system. And that is just so unfair, Kathy.
How much of this also is determined by the kind of relationship that the industry has with the government of the day? And, you know, we can speak about the taxi industry as a whole, but they also don't exist as a homogeneous group. Like now, we have Santaco, that's, you know, and the National Taxi Alliance that seem to be mostly part of the negotiations that are taking place with government. But there are many other associations that are not part necessarily of those conversations and that also hold opposing views.
I mean, indeed, there are many associations across the sector. And it is one of the most poorly studied sector. I'm yet to see good PhD thesis out there, and I think people are beginning to be worried about it, but it needs to be studied. And if you look at it, indeed, it's not a homogeneous sector, just like the business, just like the media. I mean, just like any other business in society, there are competitors and so forth. The problem is that it is so poorly regulated that the existence of an association could just almost amount to the existence of factions that could end up engaging in violence and so forth. So we need to be thinking along those lines. I mean, you are going to find that some of the associations focus locally, some long distance and so forth, but it's not clear as to what was the a genius at arriving at formulating an association along local and so forth. Those are things that we need to be thinking around afresh. We need to stop the bias that I think we approach this industry with, and we need to help them to unite. I mean, they're very much influential. I always hear people, Katie, saying they don't pay tax and everything. I mean, they drive a heavy load of the fuel levy, and they pay VAT. The fleet parts industry is a multi-billion rand industry in South Africa. The parts that they use in their cars and everything. So I think we need to treat them with respect.
One of the issues that you're raising is how little we know of what goes on in the taxi industry. There are also issues of violence that, of course, for the longest time have not been well understood. When one looks at the inquiry in Gauteng that's trying to get to the bottom of taxi violence, do you think something like that, perhaps, in providing a better picture of how this violence comes about, will also then give government a better starting point on how to better regulate the industry, or even where they should begin?
I mean, the cause of the violence is very, very simple. The reality is that people are having their own vehicles, and the roads are just becoming shorter and shorter. You have got more and more competition. You have got more and more fleets hitting the road, and that creates violence because they tend to have competition. I mean, I've seen in many other areas people just opening a new taxi rank on the existing route, and it comes down to a simple law of economics that the routes are getting smaller and smaller. This method of extracting money through transportation that they use, it cannot be sustained in this manner on this current route. It needs to evolve along our transportation needs as a society. Hence, if we limit the taxi to just the route from Tembisa to Okmor, or whatever you think about, if we think about it that way, we will not be able to allow this industry to evolve beyond its origin. So far, it has been stuck for 50 years, and I think I have not seen any innovation in the industry. I mean, let alone even in the fleet. I mean, there isn't even innovation in the fleet.
All right.